Okay, everyone. Because I know some of us have tight schedules, I'm going to go ahead and get the webinar started. So I'd like to thank everyone who was able to make it for our first online webinar for this academic year. So this is a welcome to everyone from the Committee on Women in Agriculture Economics Programming Committees. This is our first professional development and networking series for the year. And the theme of today's webinar is theme around mentorship. So as such, we titled it Who's in Your Corner? Building Your Network Through Mentorship in Applied Economics. I'd also like to give a huge shout out to the AAEA Employment Services Committee. This is our first partnership webinar together with them. I'd also like to give a big shout out to our panelists for taking time out of their busy schedule to join us and share their experiences with us. A big shout out too to all of the members of the programming committee that helped put this webinar together, especially Shelley for helping to guide along the entire way of this process. And finally, I would also like to give a brief, brief, um, brief statement just to commemorate Umalele's passing. So we would like to honor this very renowned economist who passed away this summer. Dr. Lele was an active member of AAEA and became a fellow in 1996. She also became president of AAEA and a fellow of the International Association for Agricultural Economics. She was also the first woman to graduate from Cornell University with a PhD in agricultural economics. Beyond her career success, Dr. Lele was also known for her warm and accessible mentorship and support of junior professionals, including launching the Umalele Mentorship Program within AAEA in 2013 to support students from developing countries. We plan to have a panel discussion that will bring together Dr. Lele's mentees to share with us their mentorship experiences and effects. So before I jump into introductions for everyone, just some housekeeping rules. So this meeting is being recorded up until 4 p.m. Afterwards, from 4 to 4:30, those that wish to stick around, we will have a more offline discussion to get at any questions that may not have been addressed during the panel and share different experiences amongst one another. And I guess I should also introduce myself. My name is Anthony Ponce. I'm a PhD student here at Cornell University's Applied Econ program, and it's my pleasure to moderate this first webinar series. So I'd like to give each of the panelists a few moments to briefly introduce themselves. So I'll start by turning it to Dr. Zoe Plakias. She's an associate professor joining us from Western Washington University's Department of Economics.
Awesome. Well, hello, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here today. As Anthony said, my name is Zoe Plakias. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Economics at Western Washington University. I was previously at Ohio State in the Department of Agricultural, Environmental, and Development Economics, and I am grateful to not have to say quite as many words anymore when I introduce myself. And I'm also a graduate of UC Davis ARE. So I'm kind of play in both spaces. And I forget, Anthony, did you want us to say a little bit more about ourselves or just stop there and keep?
Let's maybe keep it short to this. I'll
Okay,
bounce off to some general questions where you can speak much more freely.
great. Okay, well, glad to be here. Also, former chair of the mentorship committee of AAEA, which is relevant to this. So I'll let someone else take that on.
Great. Thank you very much, Zoe. Next is Dr. Lynn Hamilton. She is a professor joining us from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo's Agribusiness Department.
Thanks, Anthony, and thanks for inviting me to be on this panel. Yeah, so I've been at Cal Poly since the start of my 30th year, and I did not come into this profession maybe the usual path. I didn't have an economics or ag business background in undergrad, so but have been, really blessed on both sides to be able to be mentored by wonderful people and also to have experience helping to, develop that growth and opportunities in either junior colleagues or younger faculty. So I'm happy to be part of this webinar.
Thank you very much, Lynn, and thank you for joining us from quite a ways away. Well, we're all coming from all over the place, but thank you. Thank you. And last but most certainly not least is Dr. Dana Smith. She is a assistant professor at the College of Holy Cross's Economics and Accounting Department.
Thanks, Anthony, and thanks everyone for being here. As Anthony said, I'm an assistant professor at the College of the Holy Cross, which is a liberal arts college in Massachusetts. So I can speak a little bit to what mentoring looks like at the liberal arts setting or how I got here. I'm also a relatively recent PhD grad. I graduated in 2024, so this is my second year. So I can also speak to that transition. I went to Cornell, applied economics and management like Anthony.
Great. Thank you very much once more to everyone. So now we'll move into some general questions. So I'll pose these to the panel in general, and anyone or everyone that wishes to say a few words addressing each of these are free to do so. And then afterwards, I'll ask them specific questions to each of our panel members, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A. So as any questions arise, feel free to leave them in the chat box. And towards the end of the panel, I'll read them off to the panelists. Okay, so to get us started, a very big, broad question, very relevant. Why mentor in the first place? And why should mentees participate in mentoring earlier rather than later? And why is it never too late to seek out mentors? So I'll open this up to the panel.
I can start. I'll just say, why not mentor? I think it's a key part of our job that we do as faculty is mentorship. And even if you're not in a faculty role, if you're in a staff role, I mean, I think that working with your colleagues and mentoring and supporting those who, may not, may be able to learn something from you is valuable. As a mentee, I think that it's always, I mean, I doubt that anyone who's a potential mentee would say mentorship, good mentorship isn't useful. But I think there's always a fear of, starting the mentorship relationship and sometimes reaching out to people that you may be nervous to reach out to. So it's never too late. It's never too early to seek mentorship in some way. And also just know that if you've had a bad mentorship experience, there are other mentors that you can seek out. So don't let that turn you away from seeking mentors.
Yeah, I'll echo some of what Zoe said. I think sometimes just the term, being a mentee or being a mentor, I mean, it sounds very formal. And yes, there are those formal mentor-mentee relationships, but I think most mentoring comes in a more informal aspect. That certainly has been my situation. I think I've only been in a formal mentor-mentee position where there was like a contract and it was through our college, maybe one time in my career. But I have been the benefactor of the wisdom of many people, both senior to me and in some cases younger than me, or, lower on the, on the rung of their career, because I think you can learn both ways. And so I think I really view mentorship as an opportunity for growth. And I think that goes both ways, because I think it's a lot of times it's looked upon as like, oh, the more senior person or more experienced person is the one who is, endowing this knowledge and wisdom. But like I said, I've really learned a lot from my younger colleagues. I learned things from students. Like there's a particular quote from she had graduated by then, but you'll get these pithy little realizations all along the way. So I think just being open for those opportunities for growth on both sides. I mean, and who couldn't benefit from that?
Yeah, the only thing I think I would add is kind of on both sides as the mentee, you never really know what you don't know. So it's always important to ask. There's so much information out there that you may not even have the right questions. And so being in a relationship, especially an informal one, where someone would offer you that information has been really valuable to me. And it works on the same side as well. A lot of times now that I'm in the mentor role, there's information that I have that I didn't even realize that I had. And so I really appreciate when someone comes to me with a question and is like, oh, I actually do know how to do that. I do know how to get your course added to our course catalog, for example, things like that.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone, for the words. So I think each of you kind of touched on this, but the second question is like, how do you overcome those jitters of like the formality of mentorship? What's the etiquette for it? Do you send cold emails, or do you just do like cold introductions, walking up to someone you've never met at conferences? Especially for like roles of early career individuals, but also those later on in their careers that might be wanting to pivot to different experiences.
Well, I think it's always kind of that's a scary thing to like cold call. But if there's somebody, I mean, I think, there's advocating for yourself. If you know somebody or know of somebody who might be willing to share some advice or some of their experience or wisdom, to not be afraid. But I think to reach out with a polite and always be willing to take no for an answer. I think that's part of it, because, everybody's busy. You don't know what their life is like on the other side of, that screen that's receiving it. And so, being willing to take no for an answer if that's what comes out. But I see my role as somebody, kind of senior in the field, as being one of a matchmaker. So if I see a younger colleague and I know somebody who has, who I know because I know them from grad school or, from whatever, being on a committee with them, I really view those opportunities in whether it's an industry function here in California or on campus, or at a academic function like at AAEA or the Westerns, to introduce people and to play, matchmaker a little bit, especially if I kind of have an idea of what somebody's really interested in, or somebody who has come to me and say, hey, I'm kind of interested in this. If I'm not in the position to be of assistance because that's not my area of expertise, but I know somebody, then I think that's a great opportunity. It's not, you don't always have to be the font of knowledge and wisdom, but maybe your connections. And that's really that's the title of this this webinar, is that networking, and that is really so valuable, I think. And we all have them, but sometimes you have to like kind of think about those relationships, because we may not be thinking of that relationship in that manner. Like they're just a friend from grad school that that you've known for decades, but or somebody you had a nice chat with over at a reception. But thinking about those relationships in a different way, I think, can be really helpful in helping to establish those relationships.
Yeah, I was just going to echo essentially the same thing of cold emails, cold approaches are definitely options, but keep in mind people's inboxes get very busy. They're very full. It's easy to be kind of missed, and that never is something personal. It's just that people get a ton of emails. So rather, I've always had a lot of success using my existing network to ask, does anyone know someone who? And I know that happens a lot as well for us. So I work at an undergraduate exclusively institution. A lot of our undergrads are looking into Fulbright programs. And so we're constantly getting emails, does anyone know someone at some university in Peru or Colombia? Our student is looking to do something there. And we're always happy to help. If it's someone from my network who's reaching out, I'm always happy to help their student or a friend from grad school, something like that.
I'll jump in and just add a few thoughts that came up as folks were talking. I agree with everything that's been said, but I think that one of the things that I appreciate, if someone is going to write me a cold email, which I do try to respond to, and sometimes I miss, like Dana said, because I'm trying to prioritize like my current students and collaborators, all this stuff, right? ask for something, like make a small and discreet ask. I'm much more likely to feel like I can respond if it's like, hey, would you be willing to have a 30-minute chat about this specific thing? Or like Dana said, like make it, and Lynn both said, make it explicit. Like, I'm interested in this thing. Like, is this something you know about? Or can you connect me with someone? And maybe I'll be like, oh, I don't feel like I want to help this person. Um, it probably won't surprise you to learn about me that I really like to help other people, given like, and so I'm like, oh, I really want to help. So how can I do that? And if I can do that and it doesn't take as much time, I might be able to be more likely to do it. I'm less likely to respond positively to an email where somebody says, I want to get into a PhD program. Like, can you help me? How do I do it? These big, like kind of big amorphous ask that could turn into something, or I'd really like to collaborate with that. That's a really hard one. I've become much more choosy about who my collaborators are over time, because you learn that you don't work well with everybody. And so in that case, I'll be like, hey, sorry, like I don't have any projects. I'm not willing to take on students without having like more of a relationship established before we start something, right? Or take on, collaborators. So approaching with with a smaller ask, I think can open the door to something. And then also anytime you're at a conference, approaching at a conference and being like, hey, I know you from this thing you wrote or the emails that you write or whatever, is a great way to kind of like stroke their ego a bit, right? Say like, I know who you are. And then like that can be a softer entry than the entry in email where we're all just bombarded all the time.
All right, great. Thank you very much, everyone. And I think this again does tie back to the very much the fact that like your network is your net worth, essentially. Um, okay, so this I think transitions pretty well into the next question. So like we have the list of names that our networks have provided us. What's the next step then after the introductions have been made in like establishing that relationship? So like how does a mentee choose the mentor then? Like in most occasions, I would imagine that this is more informal, that through ongoing communication, that relationship is established. But is it ever much in the sense that like there are expectations of the mentor from the mentee, as is the case more in industry careers than in academic?
I would say that I appreciate if it's clear the person who's reaching out to me knows who I am and what I do. So, for example, if I get asked a question, can I help someone with their industrial organization problem? It's like, no, I can't actually. And so those types of things are just not really productive for either of us because I really can't help in those scenarios. So when you're thinking about who you might reach out to, it's important to reach out to the people who actually can provide you with guidance. And that doesn't have to necessarily be like research specific. Maybe it has something to do with the types of jobs you're interested in and you read someone's CV and saw their career path. Maybe it has something to do with even the state or the location or the country that they live in if you want to ask about what working there is like. But it should at least be a question that I can answer. And kind of like Zoe said before, I always find it helpful when someone has a specific ask in the first communication, because then, right, I can actually fulfill that. And then if it continues on to a more ongoing relationship or something you can come back to, then that's great. But it really helps in that first email to say, right, I'm hoping to have a 30-minute conversation about X. Would you mind taking a look at paragraph 2 of my cover letter? Something like that that I can actually accomplish is very helpful.
I think I would say that there's a lot of name recognition in this field. I mean, I don't think we're different than any other industry or any other profession. There are the people who we may not know them, but we've heard of them. And that's at every university, there are those people who are always in the news, who's have the highest number of publications, whatever. And I remember years ago when I was getting into grad school, that can be very intimidating. And there was like this competition to try to work with those people who were, at the name brand folks, let's just say. And that's not necessarily in your best interest because those people are very busy. your interests, your true interest may not really align with theirs, and they might not be supportive, particularly if your career plans or trajectory is not on that R1, 75% research, 25% teaching, more kind of traditional path. And sometimes it seems like that's the only lane for a career. And I mean, as somebody who took a very different path intentionally from the get-go, I've felt that my entire career, that our professional organizations, AAEA #1 is kind of set up to honor those who took that very traditional path, and everybody else is kind of off on a bumpy dirt road somewhere. And it shouldn't be that way. And so I think it's critically important that as you seek folks in your network, that they are supportive of your career choice and can provide guidance and not make you feel like, oh, you're only doing that because you can't make it at R1. That has nothing to do with it. I got into my PhD program from the get-go, actually having worked in industry for a while, having an undergrad in undergraduate, like in high school teaching. I had a high school ag teaching certificate out of my undergrad, worked for a few years, then went back to grad school. And so I wasn't like the normal person. And I was so lucky to find an advisor at all PhD programs are very quantitative, but I was so lucky to find an advisor who saw that I was different and didn't try to like fit me into the normal box. He didn't try, and if I had tried to work with somebody else, that might have happened just because that's what they were comfortable with. But I was really fortunate to find somebody who was so supportive of what I wanted to do, saw what I wanted to do, and really believed in me. So, but when I would go to meetings, people, the automatic question, who are you working with? And he was an extension economist. Most people didn't know him. So, there's a little bit of that name dropping stuff that happens, and it's, you kind of just have to be willing to say, be proud of who it is you're working with and not care that it's not a name brand, because that isn't going to do you any good in your career if you're, not on that, kind of that highway of the R1. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not shunning that at all, but I'm just saying you've got to be willing to advocate for yourself and stick up for what you want to do and find somebody who's also willing to do that.
I will agree with everything that's been said. I just dropped a link in the chat, which I have used, and when I organized the early career mentorship workshop for AAEA this last year, we did an activity around it. It's from the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity, which is a resource that many institutions are members of this, and they have some great programming that I would encourage you to check out. But one of the things I really like is their mentor map, because I don't think that you should consider any one person to be your mentor, but rather it's this whole relationship, and you get different things from different people. Like maybe your main advisor is really like, ideally you have a main advisor like Lynn, that's what I had, who supported me to do what I wanted to do, even though it was not like what the path, like the most the kind of canonical or archetypal path, but that was great. But sometimes, I needed somebody who would help mentor me in a very specific way, and I could go to somebody else for that. But I think the important thing is to recognize that just because somebody's famous or is really well published doesn't mean they'll be a great mentor, as Lynn said, and that you can seek lots of different things from different people. And ultimately, the mentors that I'm the closest with are the people who really wanted for me my success and happiness more than anything. Are there things I got from other people? Absolutely. Specific things. But ultimately, the ones that really stick and have been the most meaningful to me are the ones where people were willing to support me on my unique path and not try to mold me to anything, as Lynn said.
These are very great insights. Thank you to all of the panelists for offering up your own experiences and expertises on these questions. So we're now at close to the 3:30 mark, so I'm going to go ahead and transition into more specific questions for each of our panelists. And let's take maybe no more than 6 to 7 minutes for each of these questions, just to try to keep things to time. And again, I will state that as any questions do come up that are not being addressed during the panel, please feel free to drop them in the chat and I will read them off during the open Q&A session. Or you can also feel free to unmute during this time or that time. So, okay, so moving on to more specific questions, I think I'll pivot to Zoe. So you've mentioned these networks that you have been very involved with. And I personally have been like very curious as to what this background and like what drives you to really engage in mentorship to the degree that you do. Did you see a gap that you wanted to address early on in your career, or was it more motivated as or complemented too by the mentorship that you received early on?
I guess so. For me, I think I had some really great mentorship, but there's also things that I realize, as I've continued to develop in my career that I didn't get that I wish I'd gotten. And so there's certainly like we all learn from our experience, or we try to take the best from all of the different, inspirations of us, and many people have been inspirations in various ways. I think, I went to UC Davis, AggieCon, which is a very well-respected program. And frankly, I got a lot of, social capital just out of the name recognition that came from that on the job market. I'll tell you my job market experience, which was that I did very well in the academic job market. I didn't want an academic job. And I actually, I applied to 24 places out of my PhD. It was a third nonprofit, a third government, and a third academic. I got none of the, one of the government. I maybe would have gotten ERS position if I stayed in the game, but I ended up dying. I did amazing on the academic job market because that's what I'd been prepared for, right? And so what happened was I got an R1 job, probably one of the, top, like from all the metrics that we're, supposed to care about, probably one of the top jobs available that year at Ohio State University, amazing tenure track job, okay? I was crying in my advisor's office because I did not get interviewed to be the extension director for San Juan County, Washington. Okay, because it was not that was not my dream, right? So, and I went and I worked at Ohio State, and you know what? I'm back to about 50 miles from where I wanted to be originally because that was never my dream. It's somebody else's dream, and I'm glad that they're there. And so just to Lynn's point, right? Like I think it's so and I'm happy to, I've really learned there's a lot of things I love in academia, including supporting and mentoring students. And actually I love working with undergrads that I'm doing much more of now than I was at Ohio State. But that to me was really motivating in mentorship, like wanting to ensure that, there's so few, like, especially right now, right? There are fewer academic positions, there are fewer positions overall, right? There's all these budget concerns that people have. There's a lot of concerns about visas and people's ability to stay in the country, or where else they can go if they don't want to stay in the country. There's a lot of concerns of people who are feeling unsafe in the positions that they're in. We have a lot of government folks who have taken the deferred resignation and now are finally not getting paid anymore, right? So they really need to find a job if they haven't already, because those paychecks just stopped. Right. So right now for me, I had already been really interested in mentorship because I get a lot out of it. And I love helping other people succeed. Like that to me is like one of the greatest joys. And matchmaking that Lynn said earlier. I was like, yes, I love matchmaking. I love to be like, did you two meet? Like I'll send emails all the time. Right. But then the job thing recently, which I think, a lot of people have seen, so the applied econ job postings that I run, I had been sharing jobs across, and this is actually something that Kathleen Liang used to do. She had would cross list a lot of posts in the listservs, right? And I realized that there were lots of people that weren't talking to each other and weren't hearing the things that they needed to hear, especially students, because you just don't know. Like, again, it's like, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know you're supposed to be on a certain listserv or whatever, and that will give you access to things. And so at first I had just been like sharing a lot of emails, and people would come up to me at conferences and be like, you're the person from the emails. Or they'd be like, oh, you're Zoe. And I'm like, do I know you? And they're like, I get so many emails from you. I'm like, okay, which is great. Like, I love that. But also like, I've not met that person. And so they think of me different and then I think of them. And not in a bad way. I just don't know you the same way. So, but then this year, like I was trying to figure out, right, earlier this year, how am I going to be, what can I do in this time? What are the skills that I have? My colleagues in the profession are being impacted. I'd already been thinking about starting this Substack like newsletter for jobs because I really wanted, like, we all talk about this. We've all talked about it here, how big of an issue that is that we are not preparing students in our programs to go out into non-academic and especially non-R1 even academic jobs, right? And so I was like, okay, well, what I can do in this time is I've already been building this. Let's just take this a little further and let's create a job board because so many people need it right now. And the response has been amazing. And so because of that, like I've continued it. I've gotten kind of into a groove. There's no AI involved. It's just me. And I'm not scraping anything. Like I actually read the posts and post them. And so now I'm posting 4 posts every weekday. And I'm learning a lot because it's amazing to see like how many jobs, I try to post a variety of jobs across ag, environment, development, regional, econ, and then different levels, whether you're bachelor's, master's, PhD, and then different parts of the world, and then industry, academia, government, nonprofit. So it's amazing to me to get exposed to so many things. And actually, it's been really kind of hopeful in that, like, I feel like there's more out there than we realize for us. Like for us, as in that, like, folks who kind of identify with the ag-econ profession. There's a lot, like, I think that there's this idea that like there are these 10 jobs and like this is what you should do. But there's so many things that you can do. Like I remember I went to a bank with my husband. We were like talking to a banker and I really liked the banker. He was a nice guy. And then we finished, my husband's not an academic and we finished the meeting and I was like, I could be a banker. And he's like, yeah, duh, of course you could. But like it had never occurred to me. Like it had never occurred to me that my skill set was transferable to working in a bank, right? That I could, like, if I wanted to just be a client person and like give people loans, like I could probably do that without a whole lot of retraining. But our minds are just not geared toward that. So I guess I hope that answers the question and got at it. But I'm trying to push us more towards creating more paths and valuing more paths and having everyone find their spot and feel valued in that.
I can't testify that it's very empowering to see these efforts, and I know that it's given a lot of my colleagues here and who are close to on the market some hope, given like the grim situation in a lot of federal positions. So we really appreciate all of your efforts, Zoe. Next up, I have a question for Lynn. So I actually did my undergrad in one of the universities in the CSU system. So I know the dedication that a lot of faculty have more towards teaching than like the research emphasis at an R1 university. And I'm also aware that you've taught not just within the US, but also across many different countries in the time that you've been working as a professor. And so I'd like to ask a question about mentoring from this perspective, particularly when thinking about stuff beyond R1 institutions. So careers in liberal arts colleges and university systems, such as those in the CSUs.
Yeah, so several of the programs that I've had a chance to teach on internationally are sponsored by, Cal Poly. So for me, it's like kind of a win-win situation. I get paid my regular salary and then also my travel costs to go take some great Cal Poly students to a different country and teach. And so it's and you get a chance to, work with students in a little bit different paradigm, in some cases it's might be their first time abroad, and so there are a lot of jitters around that, but also it's a chance to kind of open their eyes to a lot of different things. But from a professional standpoint, I think just about every time I've gone overseas, I did teach at a Chinese university, at Yangling University, in that wasn't like a Cal Poly program. I just went there and had the chance to teach for a quarter. But in all cases, I was always, the program was enhanced, and my personal experience was enhanced by being able to work a network and find somebody who, I mean, I'll give you an example. One of my friends from he started grad school at Minnesota, but then he did his PhD at Davis. So I met him back in the 90s. He ended up working in his career in China, first for ERS, and then went to work in private industry, but was based in Beijing and then Shanghai. So when I had a chance to go there, I reached out and said, hey, I'm going to be, I know we'll be far apart, but just wanted to check in and say, hey, and maybe I'll get to travel around. And then he connected me with a professor from Cornell who went to that university annually and did research. And then I got to go along on some research trips, and also had, another, ag economist that wouldn't otherwise have been there. So it was amazing. So I think you can find these, these networks work in unexpected ways. And then to come full circle, that person, my former grad student friend, is now our department head, and he reached out to me for advice before in the application process. So it's really interesting how things transpire over the length of a career, and where people end up. So so I work primarily with undergrads. We did have a master's program for until about 10 years ago. And then we really, our faculty number, our undergraduate program has maintained its strength for sure. But we really didn't have the bandwidth to maintain that graduate program. So we canceled it. And so, but during that time, so I find myself being an informal mentor, I think, in a lot of cases to the undergrads. I also am a club advisor to the biggest club in our college. And I think that mentoring students who they're not even our major, but they're in the club, sometimes they find, they rise to leadership positions. There's a different kind of mentorship that goes on there, because you're mentoring not in like an academic sense, but kind of in a leadership sense, and how to be responsible and all of those things. So, and I think that's really important. And I think also just by projecting who we are in the world, whether or not you ever have a conversation with somebody, and I think this goes with your colleagues in your department and with others, and I'll speak to the boards in a moment. I think you kind of, showing up as yourself and being, showing who you are in the way you do things and the way you approach your work, whether that's teaching, whether that's research, whether that's advising clubs, whether that's faculty advising, which we don't do our own faculty advising any longer, but that's a really valuable interface for those of you who still do that. That's really, really important, because then you get a chance to have that more one-on-one time. With respect to board, so I never would have put myself out there for any of those. So I think this is also a place where a more experienced colleague can open up an opportunity for somebody who doesn't think that should be, or doesn't see that as a possibility for themselves. So early on in my career, my dean actually thought that I should try to be on the NACTA board, which, for anybody on the webinar who's interested in teaching, the North American Colleges and Teachers of Agriculture. It's a multidisciplinary organization, and there's a pretty good representation of ag economists and on that, but it's cross-disciplinary, but the common theme is interest in teaching. So I got to serve on that board early in my career. I think I was still an assistant professor then. And then because I was asked to. And then somebody asked me, a senior faculty member here had served on the Western board. He thought, it would be good to have more of a non-R1 representation on that board. And so And those board, they're always looking for people willing to step up. And when there's an election, you have to be okay with being voted down. It's not the end of the world. And so I think the first time I was elected for the board the first time, but then they asked me to run for president. And then I wasn't elected the first time, but then the second time they're like, oh, well, we saw the votes and we're pretty sure you're, you know, you had a strong support. It was just, anyway. So I think if you get asked to do those things, it's a definite benefit, just because you get to know other colleagues across the, you know, the academic spectrum. You get to do important work for your organization and you expand your network. But I think importantly, as somebody who's been there, it's important to continue that chain and to ask people who you think would be good candidates to serve, because that they may not see that for themselves, or it may feel like, oh, I'm just putting myself out there and I have such a big ego wrapped up in this. That's not it. But sometimes people can feel that way, like, oh, I wouldn't nominate myself for that. So I think that's an important place to, you know, as somebody with some experience, that you can help kind of build that, you know, build that confidence in a younger colleague.
Thank you very much, Lynn. It's very cool to hear just like how interconnected a lot of the relations that we build up early on just like make their way on to later points in our career. And last, and again, certainly not least, Dana, I personally know that you've worked as a really great mentor, not just for undergrads while you were a PhD student here and now at Holy Cross, but for the graduate students of our third floor. I remember coming to you frequently with questions and having discussions about, oh, how do I navigate this research problem that I'm having, or what classes do you recommend? How's the instruction for this faculty member? But having now transitioned away from a very recent PhD graduate to a more teaching position, how has that transition been? Like, how's the mentee of a grad student versus now a junior faculty member, and the mentorship roles for the undergrad students now that make up your classrooms?
Sure. So first I'll talk about the kind of mentee to mentee transition. As a graduate student who knew without a doubt that I wanted to go to a liberal arts college, it was definitely a bit tough in terms of being at an institution that primarily sends people to R1s. Our first week of your first year, we sat down with the DGS and he just had a slide in front of us for orientation that says, our goal is that every one of you will go to an R1. And I was sitting there knowing, I was like, well, I'm not doing that. So great. And so finding people within that space who were open to supporting me in that role. And so I should say lots of faculty members at Cornell were very supportive, but also knowing that some of them wanted to be supportive, but just truly didn't know what it's like. And especially now on the other side, I can think about like some of the advice I got. I was like, I'm glad I didn't follow that advice, because that is not how it works here. And so being able to rely on other networks was really important. So I had gone to a liberal arts college, and so I was going back to a lot of my previous faculty members from when I was an undergraduate, especially once I got on the job market, kind of asking them, you know, should I really mention that in my cover letter or not? And kind of hearing from them about the other side of things. And so one thing I would say is that just as a mentee, it's really important to make sure you're getting multiple perspectives and that you're looking for advice from people who really do know what they are talking about. And so, yes, that was my experience as a mentee, as a graduate student, and also knowing from my Cornell faculty, sometimes the advice that they were the most well-positioned to give would be things more on like the practical matters of interviewing. As a woman, I got a lot of kind of off-the-record advice from female faculty about things like department vibes, things like long-term family and relationship planning. And so knowing that you can and have people you can trust to talk to is really important, and was really important for me as a graduate student. And then now as a junior faculty member, I'm still very much a mentee in a lot of ways. And so it's been great. I ask my colleagues almost everything, including things like, should I put the date of this assignment on the syllabus or just on Canvas? Like, I'm never afraid to ask the most basic of questions, and my colleagues are always really open to answering those for me. And so one thing I would just give as advice is that people, they want to help you. They want to answer your questions. And if they have the answer, they will give it to you. There's no question that is too silly. If you are wondering it, someone has the answer and that you should ask. Nowadays, I get a lot of very job specific mentorship while I'm at Holy Cross, because there's just certain things about the way the college works. We do this formal second year review process where it's essentially like a baby tenure review. You build a whole tenure package, like what would look like a tenure package with all of the kind of things that you have so far. And then it gets evaluated by my tenured colleagues in my department, and I get this whole written feedback report. And so that's really cool, and a version of like a formal mentorship that I get. But I actually got a lot of informal mentorship just on preparing the documents and just making sure the links were all clickable, things like that. Like I was not afraid to ask my colleagues for very straightforward advice as well as like bigger picture advice in terms of, well, what really counts as service? Because I've only been here a year, so I'm not really doing anything. Those kinds of questions. And that's related to kind of serving as a mentor in both of these roles. In graduate school, there's a lot of hidden curriculum type stuff that I'm sure the graduate students here have maybe encountered. And so as soon as one person figures it out, I really think it is like their duty to share that information. And sometimes that can be unprompted. If someone I know, if I figured out something that was weird, I will just tell people, so in 2 years, when you need to register for your A exam, this is going to be weird. Just write this down. It'll be relevant later. But also being able to answer questions about how I handled issues that had come up, delaying choosing a committee, which I think is something that happens to every single Cornell student, and they tell you you can't do it. No, not allowed. And then we all do it anyway. And so learning that, yes, you can actually do that. And here's the process. Here's who you need to email. Here's the form that you need. Those kinds of things are kind of the hidden curriculum aspect of the role, as well as just being a cheerleader. I think being a mentor is also sometimes just being a cheerleader, reminding, your friends, your mentees that they can do it, serving as an example. I've survived failed exams, those kinds of things is really important as a mentor as well. And now that I advise exclusively undergraduate students, a lot of them are looking for career advice, since most of them are going into the workforce. And that's actually something that's really difficult because I didn't do that. And I actually went straight from undergrad to graduate school. So I genuinely have no work experience whatsoever. And so needing to seek advice from others as a mentor in order to provide mentorship has been part of my kind of learning here in the first 2 years, to be there for my students in that way. And kind of along the hidden curriculum lines, Holy Cross recruits very heavily, unsurprisingly, from Catholic schools, particularly in urban settings. And so we have a lot of first generation students or students who are new to New England. Those kinds of questions come up. And so I would say, in terms of being a mentor to my students who have non-traditional backgrounds, it's really just important to present myself as an open person that they can ask questions to. I don't reach out and like try to offer myself to them, because I think that might be a little weird in some situations, but instead just kind of trying to project a friendly demeanor, keeping my door open. I tell my students, these are my office hours, but also if you come to the 4th floor and the door is open, it's open for a reason. You can always come in, and modeling for them that they can ask me anything. I've even had students ask like, well, my classmates think it's weird if I start a group chat or something like that, because they're really unfamiliar with this environment, whether that's because their parents didn't go to college or whether that's just kind of the nature of being a first-year student in undergrad in a different state, living on your own for the first time. And so if you are interested in mentoring, I would say the first step is kind of just being an open and friendly person and making it clear that people can ask you questions.
I would certainly agree that you have that really friendly demeanor that makes it easy for people to approach and ask questions, Dana. Okay, so we're at 8 minutes up till 4 o'clock. So I don't see any questions in the comments, but if anyone has anything they would like to ask our panelists that you don't feel has been addressed yet, now feel free to unmute yourselves and ask away. And if not, I also have some backup questions teed up. Well, I guess one thing that I was curious about, I think hearing comments and feedback from all of y'all on the panel, it seemed like a lot of the mentorship that you have received has typically around like your career age, I guess word to say, or more senior members. How often have y'all encountered the case where the mentor is actually someone of a more junior position than more senior faculty?
I'll I'll speak to that to start. I mean, I think that it varies so much because in so many of these cases, like I'm just kind of going through the catalog of my mind of like, because I don't necessarily think of it as a mentor-mentee relationship. I would say I have a lot of to the point about group chats, like group chat peer-to-peer mentoring relationships are key to my like success and mental well-being. And then but younger, I mean like I'm thinking about, when or earlier career, I'm thinking about how, when folks came in at Ohio State after me, and there were specific things that they were really good at, that I was like, hey, um, I can help you with the hidden curriculum of the department, like, but can you help me with this? You're better at this coding thing. Can you help me like figure this out? And like, I mean, I think it's all like it's all reciprocal, and like you learn what it is that people know and how you can support each other. And so like then people who came in a couple of years after me, I didn't think of them as like anything but peers, so they were earlier career, but it's like, okay, if you need to know something, I'll support you in this, if and I'll ask you. um and uh and yeah, so I think it just flows. But it wasn't a like explicit thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll speak to that. We have as part of our RPT process, we go in, like we the whole committee at some point goes in and visits our junior faculty, and anytime anybody's going up for any kind of action, we go in and we watch. And that's I mean, it takes time, absolutely, but it is so insightful because some of our newer hires have brilliant ideas that I never even considered of how to, maybe teach this particular topic in a way. And it's just really enlightening and inspirational. So I think that is, because again, I've been here a long time, you kind of get used to doing things a certain way, but then it's really refreshing to see how somebody else approaches this particular topic, or this particular class. So I've really benefited from that a lot, probably in as much measure as that newer colleague has gotten insight and advice from me. So
Okay. So I did see a question come in. So Akash asks, as a mentee in search of a mentor, does a mentor expect to invest their time and effort to be a co-author if they help you? So I assume this is more from a research perspective. Or is being a mentor a different concept from an advisor?
I can attempt that. Does that sound okay? And then y'all can add on. Okay, cool. So two things that I'm thinking about here that could be the situation. So one, I can imagine you go into a mentor-mentee relationship and you're hoping that you would develop an idea with somebody and they would, as a co-author. Another would be a situation where you have an idea as the, whatever career stage that you're in, and you have an idea and then you seek help from a more senior person, and then you're kind of wondering if they would then expect to serve as a co-author on that paper if they help you with it. So let's start with the second one, which I think might be what you're thinking about, and then if we can talk about the first one if it's not. But in terms of the second one, this differs by person. And I think it's even in collaborative relationships where it's not specifically a mentor-mentee relationship, co-authorship can be very challenging sometimes. And I think that it's really good to set clear expectations from the get-go with somebody, to ask outright if they don't say, you know, I have an expectation to be a co-author on this if I do any work on this, then I think you should explicitly ask them so that you have a clear set of expectations going in. There are some cool models like the credit statement, which offer, you know, as a kind of framework to say, like, this is how we can like talk about how we, you know, divide up the work, and we can put that statement in the paper. Some journals explicitly ask that there's a statement in the paper about who contributed what. Also, this might differ depending on whether you're doing interdisciplinary work, because in some disciplines, it's very common to have like everybody in a lab on the paper, even if they weren't super actively involved. So I think it's really good to have an explicit conversation about that. There are some, I will tell you, it's very good to, it's very important, I think, to kind of, you know, suss out the relationship a little bit and vet the person that is senior. I mean, I have heard the horror stories, which are, luckily there are many good stories, but there have been cases where a senior person would kind of, where I've, you know, heard of a senior person kind of, you know, taking over an idea or trying to get more credit on an idea of a junior person. And so you want to, like, even if they have really good name recognition, this is why the actual respect in the relationship is so important, because you want to make sure that you're in a position where they're going to respect you, and that goes both ways, right? The other situation of the, like, if you're, I would not go in, if you're asking someone to be a mentor, I would not have the expectation, unless it is very explicit in the invitation, that that mentorship relationship would end in a co-authorship. To me, that is a very significant ask, and that's kind of what I pointed to earlier. If I developed a relationship with a mentee or a peer you know, or somebody in a mentoring relationship, and over time we developed a rapport and we had an idea, maybe it could turn into co-authorship, but I would never go into that relationship with that expectation. I hope that answers your question, Akash, and I welcome thoughts from others.
Yeah, I think I was on a committee maybe 15 years ago or so in our college to try to develop a formal mentorship program in the College of Ag. And there was a lot of discussion surrounded this, you know, formative versus summative, you know, if we want to put it in the pedagogical context of, and there was a pretty strong argument about the mentors not being part of the summit, you know, not being on the RPT, or not being part of that person's like professional packet, or, you know, co-authorship, because, you know, that can be a little bit fraught. So, and in fact, I think the time I was a formal mentor in that program, I was paired with somebody not in my department. So, which I think has its pros and cons, but I think that's something you want to be, like Zoe very well stated, that it needs, you want to be cautious about that, and not, you don't want to mine. I would say that you don't want to mine your mentors or mine that relationship for your like explicit professional benefit, to get a name, you know, like to get another line on your CV. I think that's not what you should be looking for. Or, you know, I think that, I mean, because that kind of sullies the relationship. I think it needs to be beneficial for your professional and maybe personal growth, but not in that, oh, I'm going to add a line to my CV through my work with this person. That's different. That's a different kind of relationship.
The only thing I have to add would be kind of echoing the existing sentiments and thinking about who you're reaching out to. At a liberal arts college, if someone was reaching out to me looking for the extent of work that a co-authored paper would require, it's fairly unlikely that I would say yes to someone who's not a student at my institution, because I just don't have the capacity to do that. And so that's going to be different across individuals and like who you're asking. I would say for the most part, when people are reaching out to me, it's much more of I'm looking for advice on this particular piece of the puzzle, for example.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I hope that was helpful, Akash.
Can I add
So
one more thing real quick?
Yeah, go
Just
for
that
it.
there are a few fellowship programs, actually the deadline is about to occur for AAEA, that have a mentor fellowship that actually the explicit purpose of the fellowship is to support a new mentoring relationship with explicit outputs. So in that case, there are programs where the explicit expectation is that there's some funding, you can work with a new mentor, and you produce a paper. So I encourage you to check those out. There's the Umalele Mentor Fellowship. There are two of those that we mentioned, and there's also the Sylvia Lane Fellowship.
Awesome. Thanks, Zoe. Okay, so we are now 2 minutes over 4, so I want to respect everyone's time. I want to thank all of the panelists for taking the time to share their experiences, share their wisdom, and pass on very helpful advice to all of us eager to expand each of our networks. So during this portion now, again, if anyone needs to leave, please feel free to do so. But for the next 27 minutes now, for those that wish to stick around, I will be turning the recording off to have more off-record discussions if anyone would like to have them now, or ask some more personally tailored career questions that might have been difficult to ask otherwise. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this panel.